Manda, a lot of phrases are being bandied about in this city at the moment. We've got residence parking zones, livable neighbourhoods, low traffic neighbourhoods. Can you explain the difference between these?
I mean, really, livable neighbourhoods is almost an umbrella term, I would say. So within livable neighbourhoods, and I totally accept that this can get quite confusing, there are various things that can be brought forward, some of which are low traffic neighbourhoods, some of which are residence parking zones, some of which are zebra crossings. It's anything that can make a neighbourhood better for the people who live within it. That's cyclists, pedestrians, and in fact car drivers.
Is this something that's unique to B&NES?
No, so a lot of predominantly cities, this is quite it's quite a city focused thing, it's not terribly rural, are doing precisely the same thing because they're looking at the volume of traffic they've got on their roads, and in most cities it's somewhere between 25 and 40% of all that traffic is doing journeys that are less than 2 miles, which is very easily cyclable for those people who are capable of cycling. And if it's less than 1 mile, it's incredibly easily walkable for those people who are capable of walking. So all cities are trying to cut out the unnecessary car journeys, and then with the space they've created, make the neighbourhood more livable for the people living there.
Is this just something that they're doing individually, or is this government-led?
I mean, it's government-led insofar as there's pots of money coming from the government, and there's certainly directions. I mean, our clean air zone was an absolute legal direction. We had to do something to get our air quality better. But it's not government-led as in, it's, you know, neither the government nor the council are imposing things on people. We are doing a lot of co-design, of engagement to make sure that local communities are getting the livable neighbourhood that suits them. It's certainly not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Well, I want to move on to consultation a bit later, but how many schemes are in operation in the city and how many more are planned?
I mean, in reality, if you look at it, everyone who is a cul-de-sac, or if you look at the Royal Crescent, who've got their bollards at one end so that cars can't go through, they are livable neighbourhoods. There are a lot of people who are already living in livable neighbourhoods within the city. Estimates are there's about 400 of them. In terms of the new ones that are coming in, there was a process whereby ward councillors and communities requested them. There were 48 requests, of which 15 were taken forward for further engagement at this stage, and 3 have been put in as trial pilots, should I say, right now.
Well, one of those is the Southland scheme, and that's something that came up at a recent protest meeting that was organised and held, I think, at the Hilton. There were people there from Southlands who said that only 28 people out of 300 households responded to the B&NES consultation. 11 were in favour of the scheme, 12 against, 5 not sure. The scheme still went ahead, and they think that's not democratic. They also said that most people at Southlands knew nothing about it.
So the consultation, and I hope it doesn't sound like I'm dancing on a pin, because this is true. The consultation isn't actually a vote on whether or not this goes ahead. It's a way of finding out what people's views are and what mitigations would be needed to be put in to make it more acceptable. These are put in under experimental traffic regulation orders. That means that during the period of the time it's in, which for Southlands is 6 months, in effect, this is the trial, and this is a consultation where people can see what actually happens when something's in there, because no matter what modelling you do, it's sometimes really quite difficult to see what the actual impacts are. I'm not the expert on exactly who responded to which livable neighbourhoods, because I deal more with the RPZs. But in terms of trying to get hold of people, all doors were knocked on, letters were sent, there were public meetings held, there was an online and an offline consultation. It is always the case that people have got other lives and they're busy, and they may ignore it until suddenly they see something happens, which is why sometimes you've almost got to put whatever it is in so people can see it and then judge whether or not it makes sense. There's none of the houses in Southlands who weren't contacted in some way beforehand, but they may have chosen not to get involved at that stage, which is completely their right, and are now getting involved at this stage, which again is really useful.
Well, you also seem to be saying this is a trial scheme.
It is absolutely a trial.
So it may not go ahead.
Absolutely. It's a trial scheme. We're taking input all the way through the trial, but there will actually be a formal physical survey of the whole area at the end of the trial to see what people thought. And you know, opinion, it is fair to say that opinion isn't just as was represented at the meeting last week. There are a lot of people who are incredibly in favour of it.
And being a trial scheme, whatever happens at Southlands might affect the way other schemes that are tried out might be shaped.
Yes, and again, I think people are looking at the scheme in isolation. This is just a small part of the livable neighbourhood bit round Southlands. So the planters, were they to be made permanent, would look far nicer than what's there now. But because it is a trial, we're not going to spend a lot of money on stuff that may be temporary. And once it's there, and once we know where the traffic's going, we can move to some of the nice-to-haves as well on top of that. So I think people in the head think livable neighbourhoods is all about stopping cars going from one place to another. There's an element within low-traffic neighbourhoods where we make it any car can get to any point that it wants to in the city. There is no plan at all to stop people from doing that. It may be a slightly longer journey, and it may tempt more people to think, actually, I'll do that journey without using my car. But we don't know until we put these in as trials and see how they work.
And you're not preventing emergency services from getting through?
Absolutely not. They are consulted, right, you know, they almost have, well, not almost, they have a veto. If they say this isn't going to work for us, we don't do it.
Moving directly on to residence parking schemes, which is your baby. I had an email from a chap called Anthony Robbins, who is the co-founder of a group called the 70%. They are people who are challenging B&NES' decision to impose a residence parking zone in the Walcott area. They're called the 70% group because apparently that is the level of people consulted who were against the scheme, and yet it is still being implemented. Is that democratic?
So it's interesting, the Walcott scheme. For the last 10 years, we've been bombarded with requests for a residence parking zone, specifically around the Snow Hill area, because it's close into town and a lot of people were parking there all day and then walking into town, park and stride, they call it, and residents couldn't find anywhere to park. So a mum would go out, she'd be driving her kids to school. By the time she came back, commuters were there and she had to park a mile away. So this came about because a lot of the residents, and I mean a lot, were saying that this was really wanted. I think we've almost over-consulted on it, because the person who wrote to you is completely correct. By the time we got to the last consultation, everyone who was really pro it had got in their head, well, we've already said that we really want this, and you know, we don't need to do anything more. And we very specifically asked for all the postcodes for people who are putting their answers in. And there's objections are from the other side of the Walcott RPZ, where people, quite rightly, I think, are thinking there's not so much as a problem here, so why do we have to pay for something when we haven't got a problem? My response to that is, if we do put the RPZ in half the ward, you will get some displacement, and you will be at the bottom of the list to come back round for RPZ. So it's as well to do the coherent whole in one attempt. If we took out 2 or 3 streets from the consultation overall, people would be in favour. So we will be doing some work with those 2 or 3 streets to see if there's any mitigations we can come up with to help them.
Sounds like a compromise in the offing. Now listen, Anthony has given me some questions to put to you, and I will do, if I may. Question
I'm going
number...
to take a sip of tea, if I may.
I think you may need it, Manda. He's asking, what does net zero by 2030 really mean for transport for residents in Bath?
It is a good question. The transport generally is one of the, if not the biggest contributor to carbon emissions within any city. So, and it is one of the things we've got slightly more control over. So in order to get to net zero, we have said there needs to be not 25% fewer cars, there needs to be 25% fewer car journeys. Going back to the stats I gave earlier, a lot of journeys within Bath, both start and finish within Bath, and it's quite a small city. So what it means for residents is that we would like more of the journeys that could be undertaken by a mechanism other than cars to be taken other than cars, which actually, if you think it through, means for the people who have to use the car, it actually makes it easier for them as well, because they're not fighting for the limited road space with lots of other car users. So in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get 25% fewer car journeys within the city.
Do you envisage that there will still be fossil fuel cars driving in the city after that date?
So this is more of a government thing than an us thing, and my latest reading is that they're pushing out the timeline at which they're going to stop selling new fossil fuel based cars. So I think we will be led by what's happening generally. There is, I think people sometimes forget as well, there's a difference between congestion and pollution. So even if we got rid of all the fossil based cars and we had the similar number of electric cars, the congestion on our roads would still be the same. And that really mitigates against putting in further public transport. To a certain extent, if a bus is caught behind 10 cars, they care less whether they're 10 fossil fuel cars or 10 electric cars. So we have to combat both of them at the same time.
Will the council be publishing its full detailed final plans for residents' parking zones, livable neighbourhoods, low traffic neighbourhoods, to include details of all planned road closures and traffic restrictions prior to the May local elections, to allow residents to be able to fully and clearly understand their likely impact of what they might be voting for? So
if you look at the timelines, which we've been very open with about the consultations and what stages we have to go through, as I say, there are the 3 trials in already. Of the 12 that are left, we are doing co-design work now because we've had 3 workshops, 2 workshops and an exhibition with all the impacted areas, and we're pulling together all those thoughts. March 20th is the cut-off for the pre-election period. I think it's unlikely that all the co-design work would have been done before then. I think it is likely that we will be saying that were we to be re-elected, this is what our communities are saying that they want. But to Anthony's direct question, will there be a full plan of all? No, and there never could be, because this will always be a rolling programme of community-led. You know, not one of these things is being done without the community itself saying, in the first place, this is what they wanted. What we're doing now is talking about the compromises necessary to make them work.
So, if not, how will the council consult with local residents on these matters?
I mean, I think what we've done up till now, there's been some learnings, but I think what we've done up till now has been as successful as it can be, because, you know, we often get less than 5% response to any kind of consultation. By doing it, we've actually got up to 10%, maybe even 15% in some areas, and then we are putting them all in under experimental traffic regulation orders, so they are going in as trials and people can make their views known when they actually see what's there. I have literally had people writing to me saying, please don't consult on this again. We've been to 3 consultation meetings, we've had a co-design meeting, we've had an engagement meeting. We love seeing you, Manda, but just get on and do it now.
It's fair to say, Manda, that what you are currently doing was in your manifesto before the Lib Dems were elected.
It was overtly in our manifesto. People knew about the direction about clean air zone. We overtly said that we'd be looking at the time into livable neighbourhoods. We even mentioned specifically some of the areas where we felt that cars could be more restricted. One of the things I haven't mentioned, which to me is hugely important, is in all this that we're making sure that blue badge holders have full access everywhere. I know you've mentioned this meeting that happened last week because of the Southlands piece, and we obviously will talk to people about Southlands. But there's also quite a lot of stuff about you're absolutely banning blue badge holders from the middle of the city. I don't know where that's come from, because it is just not true.
But they're going to have to pay.
They're not going to have to pay. No one is going to have to pay to get into the city.
The clean air zone, they were exempted?
Oh, so the on that, no cars are charged in the clean air zone. There are a really small percentage of blue badge holders who drive vans. They've had an exemption for 2 years. We're talking about clean air zone now, not the city centre security thing. They've had an exemption for 2 years. Bristol had an exemption for 6 months. Birmingham had no exemption at all. And during that 2 years, we have helped the vast majority, over 90% of people, use a scrappage scheme. So they've now got a better car and they can drive and they are exempt. All the exemptions are finishing at the end of 2 years. And yes, it then means that, and we've had some blue badge holders say to us, we are blue badges because we have some kind of disability. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're economically less viable than anyone else. It's right that we had an exemption, but it's also right that we're treated the same as everybody else because we have been given 2 years in which to get a compliant van. So yes, as I say, the vast majority of cars aren't charged.
We do, as we've mentioned already, have local elections coming up. I mean, you are part of the ruling administration. As things stand, there are people out there who will no doubt go to the polls and vote, who are talking about these schemes leading to a loss of trade, traffic being diverted to increased pollution in other areas where people live, and a general feeling of a loss of liberty. Do you feel that these objections, these arguments are going to lose you ward seats?
Let me look at the arguments themselves before I sort of think of any electoral implications. If people equate freedom with the freedom to be able to drive their car anywhere they want, whenever they want, they've not had that for a very long time. We have, no entry zones, we have no left turn, we have no right turn. And people, and I understand why, are quite resistant to change. But I think certainly my experience has been a lot of people have said this may, what you're proposing in my area while we're still going through the design process may put an extra 5 to 10 minutes on my journey. The counterbalance of the fact that we're going to have maybe cleaner air, it's going to be safer to cross the road, there's going to be fewer vehicles using us as a cut through, is worth it. And people, you're right, they will make that decision as they go and put their X in a box. But anyone who is building this up into a culture war about we're trying to, we're some kind of dictatorship, we're trying to take freedoms away, we are trying to make our neighbourhoods the way that the communities have said they want them, which is more livable. In terms of just the straight displacement, it's interesting to look at the stats from the clean air zone. Our air quality has improved by 20% within the zone and 21% outside of the zone. Because what has happened is people have moved into getting a compliant vehicle, and so they've got the compliant vehicle, and obviously they're driving that outside the zone as well as inside the zone. So this argument that it makes it worse for everybody else who's just outside doesn't always hold water. There is an argument that some of the livable neighbourhoods may have a boundary road that may end up getting, in the first place, some more traffic. That's what an experimental traffic regulation order is for. It is to see whether or not the traffic then does just straight get the same number of cars used to go one way, they're now all going another, or what has been proven in some other areas, that cars that go one way, if they can't do that, at that stage people have a decision to make about, actually I'm not going to drive into town every single day, one for a pint of milk, I'm going to go in once a week. Or, when I'm not having to carry anything home, I'm actually going to walk, I'm going to get the bus, I'm going to get a bike, if you're capable of doing it. That is why these things are going to be put in an experimental way. We're not some power-crazed people who want to dictate or impose. I can't tell you the hours that I and my officers have spent with individuals talking about what impact this would have on their individual life and trying to make the best scheme we can.
What about trade?
So it's interesting, when we put the residence parking zone up in Bear Flat, as an example, it's fair to say that some of the traders there were not particularly happy, and they thought that this would impact their trade negatively. A lot of research has been done to show that shops for whatever reason, they overestimate the number of people who come to their shops via car. The experience at Bear Flat has been, if anything, footfall has gone up, not down. The experience that we've had, I mean, Chelsea Road, although it's not actually formally active yet, because we worked incredibly hard to make sure there were some parking spaces for shoppers as well as a residents parking zone. I actually got an email from someone yesterday to say it was a joy. So I understand the nervousness of trade, and I have an awful lot of empathy for people who've had a pretty rotten time, what with COVID, what with inflation, cost of living. I genuinely understand their concerns, but history would suggest that the easier you make it for people to walk there, the better it will be for their trade, as long as, again, it's the words we used before about compromise and balance, as long as there are some parking spaces for shoppers as well, and we worked hard to make sure that that's the case.
And you do seem to be talking a lot about experimental, so there is room for manoeuvre from both sides. You've said compromise.
Yes, I mean, so we've got the sealed orders now for the residents parking zones, so they will be going in as sealed. However, after 6 months, we will review and see if there's anything that we could. You've got to allow these things a certain amount of time to bed in. If after a week everyone goes, oh, this really isn't working, it does take people a little while to get used to it. But absolutely, these are going in under the livable neighbourhoods are going in under experimental orders, specifically so in the light of experience we can make tweaks and mitigations.
We're nearly at the end.
I just have another sip.
I just want to move away from residence parking zones, clean air zones and livable neighbourhoods to talk about roads, which is your remit. I'm a cyclist, Manda, and I know how bad the roads are, both in the city centre and in the districts where there are plenty of potholes. What are you doing about it? I mean, we're sat in the Guildhall, and if you cycle around the Guildhall, you will come across depressions in the road, potholes. I live at Larkhall, and there are huge potholes out there too. Why aren't they being dealt with?
So, I mean, I wouldn't dream of denying your lived experience on this. You're absolutely spot on right. To keep a steady state for the roads that we've got in the authority, we should have been over the last decade, so this is not party political at all, this is all administrations, we should be investing about 7 million a year. And it's been between 5.5 and 6 million a year that we've invested just on basic road maintenance. Occasionally I get people saying, well, why are you spending money on cycle lanes as opposed to fitting in the potholes? They are unlinked in that, there's pots of money we can spend on cycle lanes via the active travel, which we couldn't spend just on potholes. But if we don't apply for and put active travel schemes in, our grant, which is about £1 million from the Department for Transport, which helps with the Transport Improvement Programme, which is something else we try and do but is underfunded. We can't keep our roads to the state that we like, so we have to prioritise. We've got quite a fancy machine that goes over all the roads, looks how deep the pothole is, looks what's underneath it, and we have a rolling programme of fixing them. Some roads are sufficiently bad that there's absolutely no point in just carrying on patching. We do have to do a full resurface, all of which is money. All of which is money, and it's really, really difficult because people think, oh, well, you're spending all this money and that's just on cars. You're absolutely right. Potholes are so dangerous, not just for cyclists, but for pedestrians and for people who are using scooters. They are equally, if not more dangerous. So we just have to prioritise, given what we know about individual roads, and keep trying to find more sources of funding.
What hope can you hold out for the potholes of Larkhall?
Potholes of Larkhall. So I don't actually have the list in front of me as what's scheduled when. I do know that they will have been assessed against every other pothole that we have in the authority, and they will get either patched or resurfaced at the appropriate time. But it is so difficult to be able to I mean, there's some areas that have been waiting 3, 4, 5 years with really significantly bad potholes that we have to get round to do. I wish we had more money. This is one of the things that if I had a desire from government, it would be, don't always fund the new projects, look at sort of getting some of the basics right and make sure we've got the money to do that as well.
maintenance. There was one hole at the front of the Guildhall that I actually featured on bathmuseum.com where the hole was so deep it had exposed pipework underneath. And I do have to say, the next day I cycled into town and hey presto, it had been filled in.
So within the centre of town, we do try and do that. If there is something that is actually a complete immediate danger to people, we are pretty responsive and we're pretty quick. What we are less able to do because of the funding, and it is purely because of the funding, is take an area like Lark Hall and say, right, so we've got some potholes that are like yay big. Before they get that big, let's do the resurfacing and sort of proactively invest in doing that, because we just haven't got the funding to do it.
But Manda, around the Guildhall, you've got cellars under the road, you've got roads depressed. There must be concern that one day a bus or a lorry or a coach is actually going to go through the road. I
mean, we do do an awful lot of engineering surveys. Safety is, you know, I kept saying it through all the projects we've done, safety is our number one priority. So the fact that the surface is worn away and there's a pothole doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a structural weakness underneath it, but you are, as ever, completely spot on. Lots of areas have got vaults underneath. In fact, not just a vault, some of them have got double vaults. So there is this much road surface and the filling below it, and then a double vault, so that they are tested really, really frequently to make sure that they are safe.
Manda, thank you for that. We've been chatting for 26 minutes.
Wow.
And I'm going to use all of this. One final question. Are you confident that you'll still be sitting there at the end of May? And not only you, but the other Liberal Democrats who are part of the administration.
I have been around in elections too long, and people laugh at me for this. I'm notoriously bad at predictions. I get a lot of stuff right, but my predictions are terrible. I will say that if I had to say it, I'd say there's a quiet confidence that if we carry on delivering the things that our communities ask us to deliver, and again, I hate negative campaigning, but at the moment, in a lot of our areas, the Conservatives are our main opposition, and we're finding a lot of people finding it nigh on impossible to vote Conservative in the local elections, irrespective of what they think of them locally, because of the shenanigans, I think that's the word I'm going to use, up at Westminster, and they're telling us they're probably going to stay at home. So elections are, you know, a week is a long time in politics. I think we're 90, 89 days away. Let's see. I would like to think that people would look at us and think they've done what they said they were going to do in the manifesto. They had 4 years to do it, in which 2 years were taken away from them because of COVID. They've actually made phenomenal progress in just 2 years, and we always said in our last manifesto we need to be more than a one-term administration to deliver what we want to deliver. I hope the electorate give us that chance.
And if you're going to vote, don't forget your photo ID.
Well, it's a really, really good point. I mean, we're making a big... It's surprising to me how many people are completely unaware of this, and specifically the people who it's for their first time vote, they're just turning 18, they don't have the same number of identifiers that can be used at a polling station. I think when the council tax bills go out or the polling cards go out, the council's plan is to also insert something to say, be aware that how you vote is going to change, because at the moment I can perceive on the actual day lots of people turning up without their passport or their driving licence. And then what happens? If they get turned away, are they going to then go and find it and come back? I don't know. Personal view, there hasn't been a single instance in B&NES of voter fraud. Nationally, it's very low. I don't understand what problem this is trying to solve.
Manda, thanks.